Hi, and welcome to this B1UP e-learning session on exchange rates and the two features that is called set rates in future and fill back indicated days. So in the exchange rate configuration, these are the two fields that is causing all this confusion with a lot of people. What they do, how they interact, and so on, and why things are not the way they expect them to be. So in order to explain these fields, there's a short version and a long version. The short version is essentially just leave them both to 0. You should never use them. They are from a time before the server component existed that can now set things on every midnight. I have a slide after this one about that. The long version requires some explanation, so let's go into that. So the history of the two features is that prior to January 2012, a long time ago now, but still, B1UP existed, but it didn't have a server component. And that meant that exchange rates, because our code needs to run, could only be set if someone actually logged into the SAP Business One client. So that combined with the problem that people sometimes need rates in the weekends and public holidays, these two features were created in order to be able to still set them somewhat without having anyone to log into the system in those weekends and public holidays and so on. And that's where they come from. Once the server component came along, in my book, the two features should not be used at all. But there's still some people who do it for various reasons, and this video, the rest of it, is for them to know exactly how these two features work. So this is rather complex. So I've been trying to simulate with some very, very predictable data, something that doesn't exist, of course, but in order to better understand what is going on. So I've invented here a exchange rate provider. Doesn't exist, and hopefully not, because what you can see is on day 1 of the exchange rates, the euro is 1. On day 2, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, in order for this to be very easy to follow, or at least as easy as possible, because again, very complex to have all the combinations in place. But we're going through them. And the first one is to actually have them just at 0 to see if we had this exchange rate provider, what would actually happen. And we will see that on day 1, you can see I will write what day it is. So you need to look here what the rate was. And then I have put in the real days here. And the euro, don't care about the other exchange rate, just look at what the number is here. And as expected, of course, if the rate is 1 on day 1, it will give a 1 in that one. If the rate on day 2 is 2, it will give 2 on that and keep the 1 in the day 1. And day 3. So far so good. If we had looked at day 4, it would be 4, 5, 6, and so on in this artificial rate provider. Now let's switch to one of the two features. So I will show the one feature, the other feature, and then the combined of those two features. So 0 was simple to understand. Now it becomes slightly more complicated because we have set now days in future equals 1, meaning 1 day. And what that means is a bit counterintuitive, but it actually made sense back in January 2012 when you needed to have it like this, because on Fridays you needed to set some Saturdays and Sundays. So the way it works is that if you set this thing up, and on day 1 it will set day 1's rate on day 2, meaning 1 day into the future. It will not set anything on day 1 itself. That might confuse people, but that's where we get the other fillback indicated days. So if we, for example, set it to 2, on a Friday, it would set Saturday. Oh, sorry, Sunday, my bad. So 2 days into the future. So in the old days, people set this for 2, 3, because there could be a weekend plus a public holiday, so they set it to 3. So all rates were slided into the future. And if we go to day 2 would set day 3 and would lead day 2 for day 1 and day 3. So everything is essentially the same, just shifted 1 day, and that is what the feature says, number of days in the future. But what about day 1? What about getting these back on track? Again, that is not what was intended. The intended thing was to be able to not log in for 2 to 3 days and still get some rates. And it was the best rates we could give, given we couldn't predict the future. Let's move on to fillback indicated days. So here I will start with day 2. Day 1 I will explain after I explain day 2, because then it's a bit more easy to understand. So on day 2, it would take rate of the second day 2 and correctly put it in here. And then it would fill back as many days that didn't have rates yet. So if day 1 didn't have any rates, it will also get a 2. The reason why it wouldn't get a 1 is because all these exchange rate providers only give us today's rate. They don't give us historical data. So we could, on day 2, the rate of 1 doesn't exist anymore in many of them. There's a few of them that can do it, but in order to keep it the same for everyone, we don't have that feature. So had day 1 already been filled out, it would not have used the fillback indicated days, because as you can see, it's called fillback indicated days if missing. In this case, it was missing, and that was the reason why it gave a 2 on day 1. With me so far. Day 3 will then set day 3. But the fillback missing days, nothing would happen, because day 2 already had something. But that was, so fillback missing indicate days doesn't really make sense on its own without also the days in the future, which we'll see in the next one. And if we talk about day 1, that all depends if the last day of the previous month had some values. If it didn't, it would have gotten the same as day 1. And if not, it would just have ignored it, because there was nothing to fill back, because it was not missing. So different scenarios with different rates here. So let's see the real example where these two are used together, so we could see why it could take care of a weekend and a public holiday in the past, but because we have the server component, it's not really needed, because it just runs every single day, no matter if you're logged into a Business One client or not. So if the both are 1, let's imagine, stop the video and think for a second, what does that mean? Well, it means that the day 2 result, given there was nothing in 1, would be that on day 2, day 2's rate 2 was set on day 3. And then it filled back missing indicated days on day 2. So this would be the result, that both day 2 and day 3 with those rates would get a 2. So same goes for day 3. Day 3 would then set day 4 to 3, and then it would look at day 3 in terms of the day, and see if it was missing anything. And it wasn't, because day 2 already filled it out. So the fill back missing indicated days could take care of getting back there in the system, but with one skewed all the time, and the very first time you set this up, it's very confusing that you set up a system that didn't set any rates for today, because it technically doesn't. It goes 1 day into the future, and then it fills back whatever is missing. Again, the best way something could be done without a server component, and again, now that we have server components, in my opinion, nobody should use these two features. We cannot just take them away because people do it, and for various reasons they think this is a better system, but it's essentially not. Set up the server component, set it to run every midnight, 1 minute past midnight, and then you will get the most correct rates for the day, no matter what. That is my opinion and my recommendation. If you try to use these features, now you should know essentially how they do it, but it is fairly complex to understand these, especially when it's not fixed rates like €1, €2, €3, because it's so difficult, combined with that on the day, the new rates will actually first come at 4 o'clock, for example, for European Central Bank. So it's essentially the old day. So now we're 2 days ahead and so on. So very, very complex topic. I hope this helped a bit. But again, the short version is don't use them. With that, thank you for attending. Hope you had a good session.